Are we ready, Ella?
Yep, we're good to go.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our 16th session of Helping Tribal Schools Reopen Amidst COVID-19. My name is Teresa Brewington. I am the K-12 Program Manager at the MHTTC. I am a tribal enrolled member of the Kahari Tribe and a descendant of the Lumbee Nation. Just a few housekeeping rules. Today is going to be questions and answers. So any questions that you have about IEPs, and I'm hoping 504s as well, please feel free to ask. You could either use the chat box or you could just speak up and ask your question, either way, or whatever makes you feel most comfortable. If you put it in the chat, me and my coworker Ella will give the questions to Lisa, who will then address them. Just be mindful of when we put things in the chat and make sure that we are respectful to each other. Is anybody here? I just wanted to introduce. Ella, help me see if you see any of our consultants or advisors here. And I don't see any of them here. Okay. Okay, let me ask too, is there anybody, we always like to ask if you'd like to start off by giving us a blessing, a song, any type of words of wisdom. So I'm going to ask the audience if anybody would like to volunteer for that. Okay, so then I have a little activity for us, and what I want you to do, please, is put your answer in the chat. I was watching ABC Good Morning America yesterday, and Kamala Harris was on being interviewed, and she made the quote, "Don't let anyone put you in a box," and that resonated with me a lot, especially for Native people. So I would like you to answer what you think that means and what can be done about it. So if you will comment in the box, I'd really appreciate it. The quote is, "Don't let anyone put you in a box." So people are hopefully typing. Good. I'll go ahead and tell you what it means to me. It means that for Natives specifically, we have been put in a box. We have been labeled. We have been judged, prejudged, incorrectly judged for many, many years and for too many years. And I think it's important that we show people that we aren't who they think that we are. You know, I still hear comments today about Natives that are just so completely incorrect and so biased. And, you know, I feel like as being a Native person and educated Native person, it's my job to do whatever we can and don't let anybody determine or make that determination for us. So let me just say a couple of the comments that I'm hearing here. And somebody said, "I think it means stay true to yourself and your beliefs." Very good. Someone said, "Do not let anyone put you in a box. Focus on the creator. The creator's plan for me. The words from the creator." Thank you, KP. Someone else said, do not limit yourself to others' beliefs about yourself. Exactly. Someone else said, "I believe it means don't let anyone try to tell you who you are and what your worth is." Cheryl said, "Maintain your individuality, especially culture." Very good. And KP, Teresa, I lost your voice. Okay, I hope my internet's not going in and out. I've had a little bit of problems today. And then Jessica said, I use this quote all the time with my students and as a constant reminder to myself. I used to remind my students to never limit themselves and to never succumb to any idea of who they are, that your life is your story. It is not written by anyone else, and absolutely no one else has the authority to limit them. That is beautiful, Jessica. Thank you very much. Absolutely beautiful. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and send this over to Lisa. I do want to make sure we did put I think we put the evaluation already in the link. Also, we were going to put a survey in the link. If you can complete those surveys and spread them far and wide, we are giving away a mask for Native American design mask for some people if you invite others to do the survey. And the survey is just so that we want to see where the services are and who needs better services. So please share that survey as much as you can. Lisa Leiter, she is the owner of A Day in Our Shoes. This is her 3rd session that she's been on. She is an expert in her field. She's been doing this for over 12 years. She is an IEP advocate. She does not work for the school system. I think it's very important to note that. She got into this business because her son has a chromosome disorder. And between her Facebook page, Twitter, Pinterest, she has over 200,000 followers. She offers free consultations to anybody that needs help with IEPs and 504s. Also, we were going to put her in this already there. So we've already put Lisa's webpage on the chat box. And I also know that she has a Facebook page. So Lisa, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. Today, again, we just wanted to leave it for questions and answers. So if you have questions, just feel free to open up, start speaking, ask Lisa what you want to speak or want to ask, or you can put them in the chat. If you put them in the chat, either myself or my coworker, Ella, will ask Lisa.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me back. I know last week we ran out of time again, but there seemed to be a lot of discussion generated around the issue of suspensions. So if you have any questions around that, if there's something we didn't get to last week, discipline, suspensions, all that fun stuff.
We did talk about the manifestation meeting, right? The 10 days.
We did, and I'm going to remember, and I had texted you last week or messaged you. I'm going to work on a handout for yes. Parents that if, what to expect during a manifestation hearing and how to prepare for one.
Yeah, and we did clarify that the manifestation hearing is when you go to this, you have to prove that his behavior is linked to his disability, correct? That is the biggest
yes.
thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have to get the team to agree.
Yes. Otherwise, it doesn't count and he can be suspended over the 10 days.
Correct. Yeah. And I should say that there are certain but what if it involves a weapon, if it involves certain classes of drugs, and this is the one that I've gone to a lot of manifestation hearings over. Significant, I think the word is significant bodily harm. So, sometimes kids get into fights, sometimes they even get into fights with school staff, but it has to be significant body harm, not just because of a fight, you just expel the child.
So it has to be significant, meaning several incidents of it, not just
the person is severely hurt, hospitalized or something like that.
Yeah, gotcha.
But just a pushing or shoving match and that kind of thing isn't significant.
Yeah. I want to ask, while we're waiting on other people to speak up, I always have a lot of questions on these. I knew the answer, but I want to keep knowing that I'm in the loop on this. A couple of things. Learning disabilities. Is that the most widely used for IEPs?
I believe, yes, I believe the SLD category, specific learning disability, is the most common category of the 14.
And can you explain how that is determined briefly?
Sure. I mean, it depends on what the parent or teacher, or caregiver, whatever prompted the evaluation or prompted the referral, is going to be what, that's going to determine what evaluations are done. But basically it has to do with ability and achievement. And, there are norms and tests have very specific protocols as far as how you score on them for these assessments. And if you fall in certain ranges, then you qualify for different specific learning disabilities.
And isn't it the ratio between your IQ score and your test score?
Not necessarily. Because IQ scores, there are, I'm not a huge fan of IQ scores for so many reasons, and that is because if your child has a reading disability and you refer them or their teacher refers them and says, hey, I think there's some learning disabilities going on here. Obviously, if they do an assessment that is to assess their IQ, and it's a very reading heavy test, the child's not going to do well on that if they have a reading disability. So all these different tests, they have to be normed for the various disabilities. A child who has autism is going to respond to test questions, differently than other kids. So it's more about, it's looking at, like I said, ability versus achievement, and finding if there's a discrepancy in between the two.
Right. Okay. And what type of learning disabilities are there out there?
Oh gosh, there are, there are hundreds. Obviously there are the dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, and those types. ADHD, that actually falls under OHI. So if your child has ADHD,
that's other health impaired.
Yeah, other health impaired, but it is considered a learning disability, and that confuses parents a lot. And they say, well, why do they want to put him under OHI when he has a learning disability? But there's all kinds of language disorders. There's expressive
writing disorders.
Yeah, there's writing disorders. There's
comprehension disorders.
Yes. There's a nonverbal learning disorder now, which is kind of gaining some steam as people are learning more about it. There are just hundreds of them.
Yep. So as a parent, if you see your child struggling in any way, the best thing to do then is to start this process then, correct? Wouldn't you say?
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
Because what I find is just a lot of the IEP process itself, from the time that you decide, okay, I'm going to request today that my child be evaluated, from the time that you make that decision and make that request to the time that they have an IEP in place, can be 100 days, because IDEA allows for 60 days to evaluate the child, and the school has 10 days to get you a letter, and they have 30 days to draw up an IEP, and then you have 10 days to respond, and all this. So you can basically, a school year here is only 180 days, so you could waste well over half a school year just kind of getting the ball rolling. And what I find is that too many parents kind of mention it casually to a teacher or casually to a school person, and nothing happens, and like weeks and months go by. And then, like I said, the IEP process is slow enough on its own that you don't want to delay it.
Right. The time frame that they have that it's required is already slow enough on its own. Yeah. So you need to make sure,
especially if you throw in the summer in there, or if they get 2 weeks off in December and you have a really snowy winter and you miss a lot of school, like it just, before you know it, you've lost another whole school year.
Yeah. definitely. I had another question. Clem made a comment, and I know what you're going to say because I know the answer to this. Long story short, there was a meth child, and they diagnosed him as a meth child, the MAT baby syndrome, whereas he could have possibly been diagnosed as something else. I'm sure this happens a lot, would be my question, where we are incorrectly diagnosed. Would you say that's a true comment?
Well, yeah, so short answer is yes. But remember, schools don't diagnose.
Right.
So what if the doctor says, that's the syndrome, then, I don't know, I'm not going to argue with that. The school is only going to find the child eligible under one of the 14 categories. So I honestly don't know if that would fall under OHI or I don't know if that would be even maybe considered traumatic. No, I guess that wouldn't be traumatic brain injury.
Well, he was thinking this particular child was autistic. But even if your child, let's say your child is incorrectly diagnosed, and I shouldn't say diagnosed, or diagnosed for the purposes of an IEP,
Right.
then you could still request certain services based on that child's needs. The what are they called that they put in place? They're not based on the diagnosis, they're based on the child's needs, whatever the diagnosis is, correct?
Right. So when you ask for assistance, what you're going to say is this is what I'm noticing. So, and the behaviors for that particular child, it may very well mimic autism, and it may, maybe the child stims a lot, or scripts, which I don't know if people know what scripting is. That's when kids, they just kind of repeat. They have entire conversations. But it's very meaningful to them. There might be stimming and scripting going on, or lack of social skills, or some of the other typical things that, go along with having autism. But that's what you're going to point out to the school. Like, my child doesn't read body language well. My child has trouble understanding sarcasm. My child seems to have a very high pain threshold or sensory threshold, or the reverse of that is very sensitive, and things have to be really quiet, or he gets overwhelmed, easily, because the various sensory processing disorders go on with autism. So what you're going to do is bring to the school's attention what you're seeing, not what like a doctor told you, if that makes sense.
Yes, and their modifications and the way they're going to be, the services provided
The
is
supports
based
and
on what you're
services.
saying.
Yeah, the supports and services then are going to be based on what the child's needs are. So they could do an evaluation and find, that there's a lot of behaviors and characteristics that qualify the child for autism. That doesn't mean, again, that the child is diagnosed with autism. It just means that in that particular school in that state, the IEP team found him eligible under autism.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay. 504.
I have a question.
Please, yes.
Okay, for Lisa. I know a parent, and I've been trying to work with her to try. It's kind of getting us nowhere. Her son has dyslexia, and he does have an IEP, but the school that provides like the reading program doesn't work for him, and it's not research based. Don't want. So the IEP lets him get pulled out of school outside tutoring, but the outside tutoring, because they use a research-based program that the parents like want for their child, that work for the child, costs a lot of money. So is paying an out-of-pocket tuition to do something like this something that should be done, or should the kid be able to get that tutoring, for as far as equal opportunity for work?
Right. And actually the scenario that you describe is really common, because we're not teaching our kids to read. And, as Teresa and I talked about last week, more than half of our prison population is functionally illiterate. So, we're dropping the ball with a lot of kids across the country. So Yes, the school district is required to provide what the child needs. And if the intervention that the school is providing is not allowing the child to make meaningful progress, then yes, the parent has to go back and kind of go, haggle back and forth with the IEP team and saying it's not working, it's not working. But here's the thing about IEPs and this whole process overall is that it's just not really a fair system. It's a very cumbersome system, and it's complaint based. So as I said in the first session, if mom doesn't speak up, it's assumed that things are going well. And what mom would have to do is, or dad, or caregiver, guardian, is if, like, let's just say it's Wilson reading, because it probably is. Let's just say it's Wilson reading that the child's doing privately on their own, or Linda Mood Bell, and mom's paying for it. So she goes to the district and says, what you're doing isn't working. I had my child evaluated and he needs, Wilson. If the school says, no, we're not providing that, mom has to use her procedural safeguards, which are her parents' rights, and take the school to due process. And from there, it's
okay.
So what I do tell parents is that if you have the means to pay for a Wilson or a Linda Mood Bell on your own, and it's not going to, financially strap the rest of your family, sometimes, there's a lot of value in the path of least resistance and not dealing with the stress of the school. Because right now, also, where she's going to struggle is that the child is making progress, but the child's probably making progress because of the after school tutoring, not the in-school interventions. So she's not even going to be able to necessarily argue that. And then I don't expect any parent, you can't let your kid fail. Because dyslexia we're finding now so much out about dyslexia. It has a really, really high suicide rate. And these kids have really, it really wears on them to be constantly told that, like, oh yes, you can read, or, and when they're given the incorrect interventions or insufficient interventions, and they can't read like their peers, it really, really wears on their psyche. And like I said, we're finding that the teens have a very, very high suicide rate. So sorry, I could go off all day. I go off on tangents. Yes, yes, the school has an obligation to provide evidence-based programming that provides the child with meaningful progress. That doesn't mean that happens in one IEP meeting. Sometimes it takes going all the way and exercising your procedural safeguards. Does that make sense?
But a parent,
Yeah, because I talked to Disability Rights Montana. I'm sorry. I talked to someone from Disability Rights Montana. They're here in Montana, and they basically said that we'd have to go all the way to the Office of Public Instruction.
I don't know that are they in like their local school district or?
Yeah, the local school district here, yes.
Yeah, no, I mean, she should get a procedural safeguards booklet, and in there it says what to do if you disagree with the IEP team. So what she'd have to do is put in writing, I disagree with the, supports and services you're offering, because it's not going to, my child's not going to learn to read that way. I'm asking for this. And then the school has to deny her that request in writing or provide it. But if they deny it, they have to deny it in writing. And then, like I said, then she has to go to, and do a due process hearing.
if they deny it.
Okay.
If they deny it, yeah.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Every parent should be getting the parent handbook, or that's what they used to call it. I'm not sure what they call it anymore. Should they not be getting that?
It's called procedural safeguards, which is like the most unfriendly language. Like, what even, I hate it. Like, what is that? Procedural safeguards, which it just doesn't make you want to open it and read it, which is probably the idea. But yes, the school district is required to provide you a copy every year. And if not, you can always just Google, special ed procedural safeguards, state of Montana, and that, it should come up.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
So,
thank you.
I do see a lot of parents, paying for these reading programs on their own, and 10 years ago when I first started doing this, I was like, oh, fight. But I understand, you know, now that I have more than one child and, you know, doing this full time, you know, you don't always have the fight in you. And if you can get the funding and do it yourself, like I said, the path of least resistance, there's value in that for families.
And that's even, you know, closes the gap even further, or opens the gap even further, because then the low income families that can't afford those extra services and to pay for it, to provide it for their children, they're being
Right.
left behind.
They fall even further behind.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just kind of, in the back of my mind, I think, well, maybe if this family's paying for it, that will free up some money for other kids who need it too. So I don't know.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've seen due process hearings. I've attended them with clients, and they're brutal. And it's, you know, it's kind of like Judge Judy, but not like Judge Judy, but you have to have expert witnesses and you have to show that your child's not making progress or that they're regressing.
And that's when a lot of parents get attorneys too, is it not?
Yes. And then, you know, because the school district is going to have attorneys. So that's, you know, you almost can't win without an attorney, because the school district is going to have an attorney because they have deeper pockets than parents.
And the parents have to pay for the attorney unless they win, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there are different ways. I know here we found a few little glitches with kids on Medicaid. And there is a neuropsychologist who does a reading program at the children's hospital. So we've kind of gone in the back door using the children's Medicaid, and they're doing it at the children's hospital. So, you know, sometimes you just have to just keep looking and looking and looking.
Oh, I see. Using the Medicaid to pay for the attorney?
No, using the Medicaid to pay for the reading program.
Oh, got you. Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So.
Huh. So you have to be very innovative and think outside the box. That's for sure.
Yeah, and you just have to keep looking and looking and talking and calling people and.
Yep.
You know.
Yep. Before I ask, does anybody else have questions right now?
It looks like there's one I have chat open from KP.
Oh, okay. Sorry. KP says, I believe a lot of the frustration with students is that if they perform really well on one day, the world believes that they could do it and they should be able to perform well every day. But the brains of mentally challenged kids just doesn't click and sync often enough.
Yeah. And I also should want to add that if you're being told that your child can perform a skill, they need to be able to perform that skill across all environments. Because taking a child to a small classroom or a small office somewhere and prepping them and rehearsing for them to read a reading passage and then having them read it is not the same as, you know, like reading a menu in a restaurant that you've never seen before. So they need to be able to apply that skill across all environments. So make sure that your child is mastering that, you know, before they say, oh, well, we believe he's mastered that skill. You know, if you're not seeing it at home, make sure you point that out to them. Because also with various disabilities, the kids have scattered skills. So what that means is that their skills are just scattered and they don't necessarily follow a natural progression. You know, that old, you know, you have to crawl and then walk and then run. I've known lots of kids with autism who never crawled and just got up and walked one day. It's just, some kids just have a really, really scattered skill set.
Mm-hmm. What is a good age if you start seeing problems with your child to address this?
I would say as soon as you suspect.
Like even first grade?
Oh, I had, I'll tell you I was like a neurotic first time mom and, you know, reading all the articles and books because there wasn't social media then. And my child wasn't rolling over at 3 months. So I told the pediatrician, he's not rolling over, and everybody says he should be rolling over at 3 months. And she said at 6 months we'll worry, at 6 months we'll worry. And she tamed me for 3 months, and at 6 months he still wasn't rolling over. And then she said okay, and we had, at 8 months we had his diagnosis. So I would say, parents, your gut is rarely wrong. You know, a parent's instincts are rarely wrong. If your gut's telling you that something's needs to be investigated, get it investigated. You know,
Let's hear some other questions, guys.
it's a timid group.
Talk a little bit about 504 while we're waiting for others
Sure.
to pick up.
So section 504 plans. Yes, and I will do that in a mention. Let me just explain 504 plans and I'll go on to that. A 504 plan is a written list that the school has to provide certain accommodations or accommodations that you would need to access the education. But I want to make sure that everyone's aware that it's just accommodations. It's not special instruction, it's not interventions, it's not reading programs. So they were never intended to be like an IEP light, which is kind of how they're getting used today. But if a child has dyslexia, you know, being in a smaller group isn't going to teach them how to read. If a child can't read, you know, you can give them all, you know, extended test time and extended time on assignments and all these different accommodations that I see on these 504s. They don't teach a child, they only accommodate the child. So if you believe that your child has a learning disability that they need interventions for, then keep pushing for an IEP and for those evaluations. Because 504s were really just meant to make your school accessible to the child and accommodate, you know, accommodate things like food allergies and type 1 diabetes and those kinds of things.
So the less severe things.
No, not even like the less severe things. It's, you know, some kids might only need, you know, they may have no learning disabilities whatsoever, but they require the use of a wheelchair.
Right.
So all they need is, you know, a ramp and the elevator key, and those are the accommodations. They just need those things to access their education.
And I've always thought that the 504 was a temporary thing. So it's not?
No.
Okay.
But you just have fewer protections as a parent. And that's not, I mean, you don't just get an IEP because you want more protections, but you don't have procedural safeguards. The 504 coordinator at the school does not have to include the parent in the process. And you don't have have much recourse if it's not followed.
Gotcha.
All right, so she had asked what if I would go over the timeline with IEPs again. Like you mentioned 10 days about something. Yeah, so where do I want to start with an IEP? If you request evaluations, you need to submit that request in writing. I can't stress that enough because you need to have your paper trail that you've asked for this. But you submit your request in writing. From there, the timelines are kind of gray. Some states have defined it specifically that the school has to respond in 5 or 10 days. IDEA says reasonable. And I believe that reasonable has been found in courts to be up to 30 days. So again, this is why if you have a hunch that your child needs something, you ask right away rather than waiting. Because if the school waits 30 days to get back to you, you know, there's another month. So they need to, within 10 days in most states, provide you with a permission to evaluate form. It's your consent that they're going to evaluate your child. So again, that could be in your possession for who knows how long till you sign it and get it back to them. Then from when they get it back, they have 60 days to evaluate your child. From there, if it's the initial IEP, they have 30 days to draw up an IEP, and then invite you to a meeting and all that. So that's why it takes longer. Now with reevaluations, when you have those reevaluations every 3 years, IDEA does not define a timeline for those reevaluations because your IEP is going to have an annual renewal date. So it's just assumed that those evaluations will be completed by the time it's time for your IEP annual renewal date. Okay, so she asked above about.
You want me to read it?
Sure.
Okay, and this is a great point she actually brought up because there is another side to this. How can you discuss these things when a parent doesn't want to admit that their child, there might be something developmentally going on with their child?
Yeah. You know, we have a long way to go with how our society treats disabled people. And in the beginning of today's meeting, Teresa mentioned that, you know, she hears all these wrong things about Natives. And I can't even imagine, you know, I did a whole series this summer with Black parents, and just seeing the racism that they deal with on top of dealing with the discrimination for, you know, having a disabled child. I can't even imagine it. So it's just getting them past that stigma. And in some communities, it's still very stigmatizing to have a mental illness or to have autism, or if it's thought that, you know, the parent passed it on and they think it reflects on them. You know,
Do you
I just
have to have the parent consent? I thought it was the IEP teams, the overall majority of the IEP team. Or this is to even get tested, though, is what
this is to get to. And okay. I mean, there are ways that the school can force the issue and evaluate the child anyway, but the parent can still, or guardian, whoever has, you know, custody of the child, can refuse special education services because there's still, you know, stigma with being in special education. You know, I mean, that's the word. I mean, we even know the word SPED is a derogatory term. And generally schools aren't going to go down that road. If the parents doesn't want to do it, they're not going to go down that road and like give the child an IEP anyway and do that most of the time. They'll probably just, if behaviors develop, they'll probably just expel the child, unfortunately.
And that's a sad part of this. It's definitely not a perfect fix. And I see that too. I see both sides of this. And as a teacher who can see that a child is struggling and wants them to get that service, you know, and then has the parent that doesn't want that child to have the service. Yeah, I could see, you know, that being a struggle. And unfortunately, who's going to be the one that ultimately pays for this, which is going to be the child, especially if they do need the services.
Right. And that's, I mean, and that's what I try to help. Usually what I have is moms who are having this situation and they have trouble getting dad on board. Dad's like, he's fine. He just needs to pay attention. He just needs to listen up better, and, you know, that kind of thing. So just kind of getting them on board with, getting dads on board with, you know, this is the child's future. And, you know, you also have to remember that a lot of this stuff is genetic. ADHD, dyslexia, a lot of these learning disabilities are genetic. Mm-hmm. And have a very strong genetic component. So the parent experienced it themselves. If they did, they might think, you know, a lot of parents think school's supposed to be hard. You're supposed to struggle because they struggled. So they think that this is just how it is. You know, or if you have, there are a lot of adults, I'm sure, walking around undiagnosed with ADHD and struggling, but they don't know they're struggling. Or they don't know that the struggle is because of ADHD, and they just think that life is hard, and that's part of it. But it doesn't necessarily have to be.
Okay, so I have to, Clem just brought up something, and I believe I know why they did what they did, but I'm just going to bring this up. He's saying that his nephew automatically got an IEP at a public school, and his nephew was obviously Native. The child was on a reservation. It says my sister had to fight to have it removed, and it was found to have been a pattern at the school. Since then, they've received more culturally sensitive Indian education and received $2 million grant to help a cultural sense, to have a cultural sense. I just think it was a good-hearted administration trying to give natives an extra hand, but this can also be condescending. Okay, I'm not sure that I understand him now. Because the first part,
it's something we see here.
okay.
Since I do live around, metropolitan Philadelphia, a couple of years ago, we had a huge issue with over-identification of Black children, and specifically with over-identifying them as intellectually disabled. And now, yeah, I mean, it's a long
Are they
road.
doing that? Okay, I have to ask, I shouldn't ask, I don't want to ask. Are they doing it because of the money? Or because they just don't understand the culture?
I think they don't understand the culture and what is seen as something that's either negative or
Different.
Their knowledge base is different from a white person or a white teacher's knowledge base. So they think, well, you don't know that, so you're not as smart as me, kind of thing, if that makes sense. And I would guess the same thing probably happens with the Native American families, that if you don't know the mainstream America culture and norms and everything, it's just thought like, oh, well, you're not, but they don't understand these kids have a whole other knowledge base. Like everybody has something to contribute, it's just different. It's not more or less, it's different.
I think Clem wants to say something. He's on
Okay.
now.
No, I just want to say it was more of not knowing the cultural aspect of it and just assuming let's help them out. An IEP will kind of give us a little extra wiggle room to help out. But I think that way is just kind of like we looked and we saw that other natives who were not, did not have deficits, did not have this, did not, they were having to have those removed because like, why are you giving all the native kids IEPs? It's basically like all the kids kind of, they figured it out. They changed their whole ways and they ended up like applying for this $2 million grant, which they did get, and they were actually able to hire natives and people who were, from the community. And I think that was the much better approach. And since then, the IEPs haven't been slapped on every native that's come into the school system. But again, it's just kind of like what Lisa said. It's kind of like they're culturally defunct about knowing natives in our culture and our familial process and extended family and everything, and even with like the feathers and hair, feather tying and all that. It's just kind of like it's so different to them that we're seen as, to some people we're still seen as, decades behind, centuries behind, and that's just the sad part.
Yep. Thank you, Clem.
Yeah, that's like I said, we had a huge problem here, and then it went the complete other way, and we had a world of trouble if we had any Black or brown child that we were trying to get an IEP for. We couldn't get an IEP for because they were so worried about over-identifying that they were very reluctant to give, and it just, yeah. So we definitely need more cultural sensitivity training everywhere in this country.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. For sure. That's especially true. One of the areas in need is K through 12 because unfortunately, non-natives are normally teaching native students. So, and we are different, and there are things that you need to know and understand, be it to know the whole child, I guess.
Yeah.
Catherine says, I wonder some Alaskan Natives, American Indian students begin with native language and identify as speech delayed instead of for ESL. Very interesting. And did you get that? Did you understand that?
I do understand it because again, I can relate it to what we see here is we have a very large Latino population here, and rather than evaluate the child and perhaps find dyslexia, we just put them in ESL classes. But surprise, surprise, can be Hispanic and have dyslexia. Of course, the child is they're gonna have to learn the language spoken in the classroom, but you can be native and have a learning disability, or you can be, I don't know, how do I want to say this, is that, yes, I see it often here that kids get put in the English as a second language courses rather than put through the IEP process when the IEP process is what they need.
You're saying, okay, but I think her comment is maybe they're not speaking the English language because they were brought up in their native language. So
Okay, so
wouldn't that be, yes, so then wouldn't that be more of English as a second language class versus?
Yes,
yeah.
then I would see if the child truly does need to learn English, I would see if the school has a program for that. But you know, that's going to depend on how the district handles those issues. I know here they just do total immersion, and I don't know, sometimes my heart just breaks for these kids because, you know, they're just completely just immersed in a classroom, and they start kindergarten, you know, they're these little kindergartners, and they go to school, and all of a sudden everyone is speaking English. In that case, they can lean on classmates and things to help them out. But I've also seen several situations with kids doing international adoptions, and they just get totally immersed. And in that case, they don't usually have a classmate to lean on because no one else speaks their language.
Yep.
So, but yes, if the child needs to learn English and that's what they're teaching at school, I would ask about that. But I also wouldn't automatically assume that's the only issue. They may in fact have a reading disability, but can they read, can they read the books, whatever, in their native language? That should tell you, as it progresses.
Right. All right. What other questions do we have, guys?
I had a comment. I have the experience of working with Head Start kids, most of my educational background. I find it really important that that the Head Start has a disabilities person there or somebody that can work with that area, because with the kids that I've worked with, they either they will work with me and they can recite the alphabet like the back of their hand, but then they see a stranger, they won't work with them. So then they get diagnosed and then they get labeled, and that's really not the ticket. They're halfway there, but give them time. And then the other part is that I think it's good to have your kids in Head Start or a daycare that has that ability, because then it gradually warms up the parents to the fact that there might be something lower, and then that gets labeled or it gets handled, and then they can go into the school district and already have the paperwork done. So then their services continue.
Yeah, I mean, especially with the little kids, they're going to have preferred environments and preferred people to be around.
Mm-hmm.
But really, any thorough evaluation should be a whole child kind of approach, and they should be asking the parents questions, and they should be asking, teachers and other aides and things for anecdotes, so that hopefully somewhere along the line, someone like you can raise their hand and say, oh no, she knows the alphabet, she says it all, she sings it all the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but there's sometimes you get caught in the system and get that non-favorable worker. So, or the one that doesn't play on both sides of the fence.
And the services you're talking about, the early services, what were you calling them?
Head Start.
Head Start. Is that available to anybody?
That I know of, because it's written into the program. Then they have grant money to get somebody that is certified to work with them. And then some areas, I know that where I was at, they had a therapist that was a play therapist person that was on another grant. So it's grants that were written for another person to be within our building, and they have the background of working with and degree working with special ed or kids that need have extra goals.
And that's good, because then you're identified before you even go to school then.
Yeah.
Right?
And then some of our kids would, they would go, depending on their energy level, they would go a half day with us, and then the other half day would be with the school district. But some kids, their not dyslexia, but their you said it earlier. No, I can't think of it.
Learning disability,
No, it was the one where the kids are hyper and can't not
ADHD,
ADD. No.
ADD.
You said it. She said it earlier, and I can't think of it. Autism. They were autistic, and so one brother couldn't handle the schedule. It was too much for him. It was overwhelming. And then the other brother liked that schedule. And so and turns out that one of the brothers couldn't hear in his ears. And as soon as he started hearing, everything flowed. But I mean, that was more eyes on him and more professional observation, I guess. I get that.
And don't they do eye checks and hearing checks as part of the IEP process?
For some reason that didn't go through, but then again, it could have been where that brother that had the hearing loss, he didn't like anything touching him, so they avoided that. They couldn't give him a hearing test to put on his ears. He wouldn't let them touch him or anything, so he was very sensitive to touch.
And I even saw Lisa shaking her head no when I said that. So I thought that they were required to get a hearing test, an eye test, and a physical exam.
No, that's something that's typically done by state for all kids. So you're going to have certain, and these are just screenings. I mean, they're not even really tests. They call them screenings. Mm-hmm. But, you know, kindergarten readiness is a big one where they'll screen for a lot of things, eyes and ears. And then I think they do it again in, I know in my state, I think it's 4th and then 6th grade. And then, you know, they do a scoliosis screening and again, it's all screenings and it's not a
yeah, I gotcha. Yeah.
And I could see where, a school nurse puts the headphones on and kid doesn't want to put the headphones on. And she's like, okay, next, So.
Yep.
All right, we have time for 1 or 2 more questions.
But you can look up in your county. I'm seeing a couple of little chatter here about Head Start. Look up in your county for what your county does for Head Start. I think it's different, and ours isn't even called Head Start anymore. They call it Even Start, and it's only available, I think, to migrant family. It's part of the Migrant Education Network. So, it's going to be different for every area, but look for it because they're common, and you should be able to find something somewhere.
Does anybody else want to follow through with one more question before we wrap this up? I actually learned a lot. I just want to say you refreshed a lot of what I used to know. I could definitely say that, and I knew this before, is that this is a parent-led program. If you do not fight, you're going to get the minimal services. So, when you see these things within your child, you make sure that you're your best child's advocate, because nobody is going to know your child more than you. And these services, if they're good, they are helpful. They do help. They are effective. And we want that for all children, not just some, because they all deserve it. Lisa, thank you very much. I
see another question, and I have time to answer it, so that's fine.
Okay, I didn't see it. Where are you seeing it?
An IEP plan for gifted.
Okay, yep.
But not doing well online. So first of all, I think it's only around, I want to say around half of the states recognize gifted programming. So not every state acknowledges an obligation to gifted children, first of all. So I'm going to assume, first of all, that you are in one of the states that does. That being said, I have not seen many places that do gifted well. I see a lot of accelerated curriculum and trying to push the kid ahead, grade levels and reading and knowledge and projects, but I don't see a lot of enhancing. There's a really great website and group and club or whatever online called Hoagies, which it's a really funny name. Hoagies Gifted. I'll type it in right now. Look for that. And those, I mean, and again, it's a largely parent-run group, and parents sharing resources on what's worked and what hasn't. And they've really kind of cracked the code on some great ideas for gifted. Now, if it's not working online with distance learning, you know, other than asking the child what they don't like about it, I know that my own child, my non-disabled child, he's underperforming because he just doesn't like it. He's not with his classmates, and he doesn't get gym class, and he doesn't get recess, and he's just not doing well.
Lisa, I got to ask another question
Sure.
that I've been meaning to ask you. Testing.
Mhm.
I know that some children with IEPs are still required to take the state exams, correct?
Mhm.
Unless they have a portfolio. Is that still?
Are you talking about for graduation requirements?
Yes.
Okay, graduation requirements is by state. So you're going to have to look up your state and what their graduation requirements are. And that's one thing that you definitely want to make sure. If you want your child on a traditional diploma, high school diploma track, you make sure that, you know, yes, kids with IEPs can graduate with a diploma and they can even go to college, but you want to make sure that they stay on that track, because that is another way I learned this summer that it's one of those, what's the word I'm looking for? One of those systemic racism issues where they just tell the child or the parent at a very young age, you know, the child's 8, 9, 10 years old, oh, well, don't worry, she has an IEP, so she doesn't have to take the standardized test.
And they'll do that early, and then they're not getting what they need to get in order to be college.
Right, and then if they don't take that standardized test, they're not eligible for a traditional diploma. So you want to start having those conversations early on that you know, if your child can be expected to graduate with a diploma, that they're on the diploma track. And then if they need assistance, if they need extra testing time, or if they need someone to actually read the test to them, or if they need to answer the test verbally rather than written answers, or whatever accommodations it is that they need, that they can do that or do a project or whatever. You want to start having those conversations early, because I run into so many parents, and it's April and May, and they're like, yeah, you're supposed to graduate, now they told us you can't. And you know,
You mean they find out there at the very end that they're not even going to graduate with a diploma?
Yeah. Because they just, you know, they missed that part of the conversation, and they were just kind of along for the ride and assumed that the child was graduating, and
Or they didn't understand that part of the conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, I know my child is not getting a diploma. He's not. He takes we have the standardized test that you have to take to graduate in Pennsylvania, and then we have this alternative test. And it's very clear to you that if your child takes this test, that they do not get a traditional diploma.
Okay. All right, guys, it is 2:59. I do have a couple announcements. Please do the survey. I think Ella put it in there earlier on. Also, we will not be, this is going to be our last series before our holiday vacation. So happy holidays to everyone. Please, please, please stay safe. I hope you enjoy your time off. We will see you next year. You will need to you're going to have to sign up again for our listserv next year, because we are making some changes. So in order to continue listening to this, you'll need to register again. But thank you, everybody. We are also going to have Lisa back here at the beginning of next year to do maybe a 2-day workshop to get into more detail about IEPs. So any last questions or comments before we go?
Yeah, Teresa, just to clarify, if you are signed up for a K through 12 or MHTTC listserv, you don't have to re-register. But if you haven't registered for a listserv, that would be really helpful, just so you get notified when we have our next event. So
Okay,
we
sorry
look
about
forward
that.
to seeing you in the new year.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you, guys. Have a great Thursday. Be safe. So, and we will see you next year, 2021.